Welcome to episode 3 of Woodbury's lecture series, Imagine. I know I say this every week, but it's still true. I'm really excited about tonight's conversation. I'm going to introduce the first speaker and set us on our way so we can make as much time as possible for the conversation. So our first speaker is in architectural. I think we're getting a little bit of feedback. Apologies, I'm getting feedback somewhere. All right, that must be me. Our first speaker is an architectural designer and generative artist working for Office Untitled. His expertise lies in integrating generative AI, CG animation, and simulation technologies to create innovative architectural typologies and styles reflective of the interplay between digital and built environments. Please help me welcome Carlos Navarro. Ooh.
Thank you, Kako. Let me share my screen right now. Okay, yeah, thank you, United Futures and Woodbury University for allowing me this space. It's great to have these opportunities to foster research in architectural technology. Tonight, I want to speak about the current digital turn, as I understand it, and architecture in the economy of means of AI. To start, I am an architectural designer. I work at Office Untitled in Los Angeles. Have a background from Peru, and I did the Master of Architectural Technologies in SciArc. Recently, I participated in several computer-aided architectural conferences, such as CADRIA, Digital Futures, Acadia, and several more, and all related to the field of AI. And this is a bit of an overview of my architectural practice and the research that I do in parallel. I think that as a professional, I operate always trying to blur the boundaries of the architecture practice, or what it's commonly defined as a standard in the AEC industry. And I explore fields that converse more with interactivity, mixed realities, and of course, generative AI. So architecture in the economy of means of AI, what do I mean by that? 2 years ago, when I started teaching at Universidad de los Andes in Bogota, Colombia, I started questioning the new capabilities that I had to produce geometry and produce architectural form. And it was all the result of the new advances or the new computational power that was available. And this, I related this to theory that was present in research of people like Mario Carpo, and I identified what it was, computable matter, and also this phenomenon of hybridity or hybridization. So I was very interested in those two things. Firstly, how you understand matter in a computational way and what it is, and also the implementation of this new type of medium. So I think I started to realize that we were somewhere past that second digital turn that Mario Carpo was speaking about, always speaks about. We're somewhere farther in the road, and my research. This coincided with my research in artificial intelligence, and this is a bit of a compilation of what I've done so far, which passes through these two stages. First, the personalized generative training, which has to do with formal material and performative intelligence, and then the democratization of learning retrieval with the public diffusion models, and also the implementation of this again the computable matter and the hybridization of these, and implementation in the digital realm with the advent of the metaverse. So for the first part, I want to speak about basically the GANs and how I started with this personalized generative training. These are just some explorations of how I started to approach AI through training of 2D images, but also explorations in 3D training through coding. So the first exercise that I want to show, which became a tutorial in Digital Futures, was this GAN's digital form and matter that was a study on architectural typology through latent space. It was a research in arch typology, and then this is just to show a basic workflow that I used, which was based on the collection of data sets of images, and how you could generate not only new images but also new 3D form. So it had to do with that databases, and then like pixel projection to generate 3D form based on training. And then this exercise engaged a lot with the agency of the current NFT culture to represent and inform architecture. And all these exercises, they are trying to generate form, but they also are very focused on architectural representation and how you combine or how you work within that realm to generate interesting artifacts. I am sorry because I'm seeing that there's some green screen, but I hope that this is understandable. These are some outputs from the tutorial that I gave at Digital Futures, interpolations of arch facades by some students, and then, or for example, these kind of latent space explorations of towers in the style of Zaha Hadid, of one of the students, and then how you would you could be able to generate 3D form through point clouds or through different mediums like voxels or particles. This is a second exploration that I did that had to do with material intelligence in the circular economy, the end of waste. This was the title of the workshop that I ran at Cadria in 2022. And this time it used neural networks to study material stages. So it was very focused on materiality. As you can see here, we ended up realizing architectural artifacts, 3D architectural artifacts that were made out of this process of digital recycling. As you can see here, these are images about waste of some materials, and then how we were able to use artificial intelligence to train a model, generate a data set, and then use the images of that data set to basically make a parallel of the sorting or recycling process that happens in the physical world, but through algorithms. And as you can see, there are patches and groups of images that helped us recycling digitally these materials and generate new materials, as you're going to see. I mean, these are examples from plastics generally, or polyurethane foam. And then how we were able to use, as you can see in the images below, these new digital materials. We were able to produce using these new digital materials, utilizing generative adversarial networks, or GANs. And again, they are just explorations within that latent space. Eventually, those materials became 3-dimensionalized. This was very heavily based on volume, using VDBs, which was a new medium that I started exploring. It wasn't not mesh, not point clouds, but VDBs. And then how we could use foreign software, like foreign to the AEC industry, to realize better represented architectural objects, as in these examples. And again, they played with digital materiality of that was possible to realize through these animation-based softwares like Cinema 4D, for example. These are some of the results that we got of these architectural artifacts. Some student outputs that had to do with some organic growth, and yeah, just basically interpolations with architectural masses. Like in this case, it was a cathedral that was informed by these 3-dimensional data sets that we try to interpolate. A third exercise was this workshop that we ran at Digital Futures, called Performative AI, Neural Models and Agents. And it was, it was a little bit more recent. It used DALL-E, Disco Diffusion, and Clip to generate, again, animations. We started exploring depth, how we could get depth from images to just generate 3D form, just like utilizing them to project in the 3D space. These are some of the results that we achieved. We were able to generate 3D forms from 2D images generated by AI. And then not only that, we were able to utilize that to run machine learning agents and generate circulations and explore AI in a more performative manner, as you can see in these videos. Yes, you can see in these videos, we have agents roaming around these 3D environments that we generated from 2D images. And these are more explorations about better we utilize better image-to-image models like Midjourney, and the diffusion that we engage with the diffusion that happened to generate those images. And then we were able to put that into the 3D engine environment to, I hope this plays. Well, that one is not going to play, but this one does, which is, it's basically architectural artifacts that are mutating live, are interpolating live, and I'm talking about their latent space, and then how we were able to use those interpolations to express this through digital materiality with particles and trails and VFX, and combine it with machine learning agents that could inhabit these architectural artifacts. These are students' outputs from that workshop. And then this is about world building and how we used AI to generate narratives. We use it to generate avatars. I'm just going to play this manually. But as you can see here, this was an avatar that was generated using an image translation model to generate a humanoid shape from 2D images, and then we use ChatGPT. We use the GPT model. Like yes, this was like 2 years ago, to train a speech for the avatar. It uses NVIDIA Omniverse to move the mouth of the character. And as you can see in this video, I hope it plays. No, I think it doesn't. But the mouth is actually responding to the speech. It's not only like a random animation. I'm going to pass through these slides. And these are just exploration of when the diffusion model is exploded, and exploration with DALL-E. And I always say this because I am really not that interested in image generation, and I am more interested in just creating architectural artifacts. But at this point, I realized that AI was like it had really advanced in terms of being able to produce diagrams, or how I like to express architecture. And so it was already a tool that we could use, that was giving us interesting results. This doesn't play. I'm going to try to share again. Yeah, okay. In this case, for example, this is just like 4 iterations made in DALL-E, but through the use of AI models like Midas, or in computational design techniques with like stereo animations, we were able to generate 3D form from 2D images. And these are more explorations about with just like new tools within the AI models, like outpainting, and again engaging with representation and architectural axonometric drawing. It's not just like trying to create the money shot rendering. It's more about actually exploring what the architectural means of representation can do with the new tools of AI. As in this case, in which, for example, we're using the diffusion of the model, and we're extracting the depth maps of those images to generate, as you can see here, 3D volume in real time that could eventually be inhabited again with agents, in the metaverse. Yeah, so these are explorations with how you represent these. Like in this case, it was point clouds using game engine, Unity to be more specific, which is what I use. And then some image to image, some image to video explorations from late last year, before we had Gen 1 from Runway, as you can see here. But I think that stage was very interesting because, again, it wasn't like a ready product. It was more about just exploring what it could do. And I think the results from those like unfinished tools are usually more interesting because it's not what you would expect. It's just, it gives you something different. And then like this final slide is just to make a parallel in which I was exploring at the time, which was like data sculptures. As you can see, this relates to the work of, for example, Replica and Adol, but how we could use this to actually generate architecture. And that's why I always combine whatever that I am able to produce in 3D. Is like, okay, how does this work, as a space? Is it actually usable for inhabiting? These are the questions that I always ask myself or try to resolve through my work. I just want to give a bit of an overview of what I've been doing this more recently this year, I have a paper that was published. Is going to be published in Cadrea, and it's about 3D neural synthesis. And again, it combines text to 3D and how we're able to use text. Let me scroll here. I mean, and this is a paper and a project that I've done in collaboration with George Gita and Daniel Escobar, which are my they have been like great collaborators, and we've been running workshops, and we continue to write. What I wanted to show is we've developed like different a series of scripts to that can help us. I mean, we've built our own tools for generating 3D form. Recently we've been exploring NERF, which are neural radiant fields, and basically what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to use, like as you can see in this image, like a wide architectural model. And what are the tools that are available right now for us to just modify, for example, this shape? We can change it through image to image with I don't know, stable diffusion or similar models, and then we are trying to use the available technology through NERF, or I don't know, lately with Gaussian splatting, to we generate these camera paths and reconstruct architecture in as we wanted. So it's actually informed geometry. It's not just like a translation. So these are just some explorations of what we've tried, and then how we use VFX from game engine, from Unity to realize actual these virtual environments, as you can see here. These are some of the outputs of what we've got. I can show these. This is basically our pipeline that we're gonna we're revisiting this in a new workshop that we just launched it today. So we encourage people to just like check it in our social media handles. Yeah, it's again like how you go from a basic shape and then translate it into a readable geometry with NERF, and then implement it into a game engine environment to have an architectural or a digital architecture experience, as you can see in these images. And then using the power of again the game engine to just indulge in the capabilities of digital materiality that these platforms allows us. There's like we are exploring point clouds and different sorts of representation for these. Yeah, and I think that's about it. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, Carlos. A lot to think about. I'm going to jump into introducing the second speaker, so we have as much time as possible for the conversation. So our second speaker is an associate professor in practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, teaching and researching on the relationship of geometry, data, AI, and machines to architecture, design, and culture. He is also co-founder of Certain Measures, a Boston, Berlin-based studio that combines design and data for systemic and scalable approaches to spatial problems. Please help me welcome Andrew Witt.
Ooh.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Kako. Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here and excited to talk with you all. So let me share my screen. Great. Thanks again for the invitation. Very excited to talk with you all. Today, what I wanted to share was a little bit about this potential relationship between digital design and the earth that surrounds us, and really to think about digital design as of course, a kind of like media practice, but also as a regenerative practice, something that can help to heal the sort of issues with planetary ecology, for example, that we've created over the last, couple hundred years. And in particular, I wanted to share some work from our design office, Certain Measures, that really tries to deal with these transscalar, difficult systemic issues by means of digital design. So we're a studio that really tries to combine imagination and evidence in the design of architecture, experiences, products. And we try to draw kind of like omnivorously from many different disciplines, fuse them together into phygital experiences that have both a digital and physical manifestation. And our work sort of ranges from the material scale to the planetary scale, but the projects always have this sort of like dual reality. They'll have sort of some physical manifestation and then some media manifestation as well. So, so I'll show you just very briefly a trailer of the kinds of projects that we're engaged with. We really try to look omnivorously to a whole range of different design practices. Design fiction, design future, obviously sort of system design, data visualization, and think about how all of those things can be combined together into a practice that leverages research and design, or leverages research in the creation of design. A lot of our work involves hardware prototyping, it involves software development, it involves obviously like fabrication and physical making to create these optimistic visions of what our shared planetary future might look like. So one of the big issues with that shared planetary future is how we have had just an extremely consumptive culture, which creates an enormous amount of waste. So as you may know, something like 30% of the volume of landfills in the US and the developed world generally is construction waste, actually. So when we demolish a building, most of that stuff goes straight back into the ground, but in a denatured, corroded, very degraded sort of state. One of our thoughts was, especially when we were starting out, was as young designers, how can we build things as cheaply as possible? And there's nothing cheaper than garbage. And so basically what we wanted to do was to turn a lot of the expertise that we developed around computational design and apply it towards this problem of waste reuse. So our answer to this problem was a project that we called Mind the Scrap, which was a project that leveraged morphological classifiers and machine vision, self-organizing maps, and essentially scanned that scrap and created a kind of database that could be used as the basis for new structures. And these new structures are really negotiations between the scrap, which has a very particular kind of geometry, and the desires of the architect. There's sort of like meeting between what you want and what you have. So here you sort of like see the media installation of that as large-scale series of projections. And here are some sort of like small models that demonstrate this kind of process. And you get these results which feel a little bit fragmentary somehow, like that there's a sort of like shattered and reconstructed quality to them. And there's this sort of negotiated form, something which is not an ideal form. In fact, all of these we tried to create cubes, but with the scrap that we had, it sort of deformed them into these other kinds of bodies. But I think there's something beautiful in that kind of imperfection or reorganization, reconfiguration. So recently we had a larger scale installation of this at the AI Art Center, which is a sort of like exhibition space for AI and machine related art and design in Shanghai. And so here you can see this geometric method sort of like writ large at the scale of something that could be occupiable. So we actually extended this process in a number of different ways across a series of different projects, from the sort of product scale to the city scale. And as time went on, we started thinking about other ways that we could implement this kind of in the built environment. So we had sort of a friend that bought a German nudist colony, which is sort of, I don't know, a funny story in its own right. But he said, hey, I have these old like cabins, basically. Do you want to deconstruct these and use them actually as part of this process? So we did exactly that. We disassembled the pieces. We did this sort of like forensic scanning, which was, it was basically like a 3D scanning process of the planks, which captured the geometry, but also the weathering characteristics. We actually worked with a company that does, or we sort of like had some talks with a lumber company that did what's called tomographic scanning that could allow the structural, basically like the structural X-ray scanning of these kinds of pieces. So in principle, we could integrate some of that information as well. But once we had those scans, we could create a kind of configurator for those pieces. And so for us, we use Unity actually as this way to create configurators for possible futures of architecture. So this is an interactive sort of experience. This was commissioned by a museum called Futurium, which is this kind of museum of tomorrow in Berlin, I guess. And visitors could come, take this database of scrap, and then configure their own kind of new dacha, or sort of like cabin of the future. Now, one of the things that was interesting geometrically is that from those scanned pieces, the scanned pieces, because they're very particular, they induce a very specific kind of geometry on the possible forms of this structure. And so here on the left, you see the sort of like vaults which are induced by that particular kind of geometry, and a couple of images of the possible results of those kinds of experiments. So, you know, at one point we wanted to create this sort of like sauna on the sort of like beautiful coastline. We didn't achieve quite that sauna, but here you can see the sort of like installation view of the piece. At the left, you can see the large scale projection of this kind of configurator, and there's a small interface that allows visitors to browse and really imagine the new kinds of forms that could emerge from that scrap. Then at the right, you see the piece itself. So we constructed basically like a corner of one of these dachas of the future, reconstituted from this scrap. And we had actually there were like some fashion shoots there, which I thought was kind of like funny. There's actually, the model has this kind of like 70s vibe. And one of the things that I think is also that I enjoyed about this piece is that, of course, we have the enclosure, which has been reconstituted and reconstructed, but also we have this like 70s wallpaper, which has also been permuted and reassembled sort of Rubik's Cube style on the interior. And so, you know, through all of these kinds of projects, we're trying to think of this way that we can use digital media and digital processes as a way to see our world around us in a different sort of way, to see nature and the city almost with the same kind of eyes, to reformat them together and make those things a little bit more interchangeable, to make them civilization and nature somehow to talk to each other a little bit better. And so this is an example of a piece that we did that sort of extended this idea of scanning scrap materials actually to the city scale, and to use that as to use that raw material as the basis for all sorts of new possible forms. So out of this process, we kind of gained this, I guess, nuanced fascination for processes of scanning. And for us, it's always this interesting relationship between seeing and charting and cartography and mapping and reconstituting those maps, or using those maps to reimagine new formal possibilities. And in particular, we were interested in this relationship between mapping and nature, how we scan nature and sort of represent it. And so we did this sort of like funny project with an artist by the name of Clément Valla, who you may you may, if you've heard of him, you may have heard of him because of his project called Postcards from Google Earth, which was basically the snapshot of a bunch of early Google Earth images, which had like collapsed bridges and sort of like flattened forests and all sorts of other bizarre artifacts. But basically what we did is we scanned a Google tree photogrammetrically and in the metaverse, as it were, and then reconstructed this as a physical object. So when people see these images or these videos, they're like, oh yeah, this is a really nice VR object or AR object. But in fact, it's like a physical object that somehow like reproduces all of the strange kind of opticality of the metaverse object. So this is an object actually, which is, or I mean, not an object, but this is a sort of species, which is a rare and sort of disappearing species of tree. And so we somehow like the idea that this was also an act of preservation in the process of that scanning. So we took this idea of sort of like scanning nature and somehow like monitoring nature, and that being sort of like an act of preservation, a step further with our recent installation for the Museum of the Future in Dubai. So the Museum of the Future is a new kind of experiential vision of what tomorrow could be like that opened last year. And when you walk into the museum, you walk into the world of 2071. And each floor in the museum is a slightly different experience. There's a space station, there's the spa of the future. And on the floor where we had our installation, we were looking at the regreening of the planet. How do you think about bringing the planet back from the brink in 2070? So in this sort of like fictional institute, you see the gathering of genetic information from across the planet, the engineering or augmentation of species for the sort of like replenishment of the planet, I guess. And then in the room that we developed, you see a kind of series of imagined species that we worked with a geneticist on, and a planetary view of how all of those come together. So this clip sort of shows some of the elements of this room. So on the small scale, you have these very intricate dioramas of these speculative species, these 80 genetically enhanced species. But then at the large scale, you have this kind of planetary view of a web of life realized through these dynamic projection maps that connect what's going on at the planetary scale to what's going on at the level of ecology. So here you can see a sort of like time-lapse projection of that sort of large-scale vision. We called this wall the geoscope, which is sort of an homage to Buckminster Fuller, who did a lot of developed a series that he called these geoscopes, which were planetary monitoring instruments. So we were super inspired by natural history museums from the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. And we wanted to ask what this kind of museum, I guess, which tried to gather all of nature in one space, what that would look like in 2070. So in producing this this piece, there was a lot of media production, actually. We wanted to show in a really tangible way how these species would go out and rewild the planet. So we have this kind of like monitoring footage that sees these engineered comb jellies, for example, check it, or monitoring toxicity levels in the ocean, or these sort of cryptobiological flowers engineered to sort of to flourish in this remote tundra environment. And then we also, in the spirit of sort of like combining the physical and digital, we developed this, we basically like played dress up and captured this footage of these fictional future scientists who are gathering samples, bringing them back to the lab, and really like testing this future environment for all of its possible toxins. So on the other side of the room, we have what we call the nursery, which is this huge wall of a series of these engineered species. And as part of that, we also have these kind of holographic displays, what are called transparent LCD displays, which have these data visualizations which tell the story of each of these species. And so you really get this kind of like very detailed understanding of not only what the species is, but how it relates to ecology as a whole. So here you can see some snapshots of some of those species. And this is the kind of supercut. So we worked with some art fabricators in Germany who were just really at the top of their game, these guys, ID3D. And we essentially designed all the species and gave them very detailed renderings. And then they produced these amazing kind of, museum level models. At the same time, we were thinking very carefully about what happened at the very small scale, even at the scale of bacteria. And so we began to design bacteria that actually had this symbiotic relationship with many of the other organisms in the show. So this is sort of like a time-lapse clip of all of these sort of like TLCD videos. The idea was that at any particular time, you would see some of these incubators basically cultivating the organisms. And then at a certain point, they would be fully grown and they would be deployed into the world. And then on the monitoring wall, you can see all of the relationships of those organisms, how they're growing and flourishing, and this AI that's sort of like slowly becoming aware of the charge it has to regreen the planet. So, so this project was interesting because it brought together ideas of speculative futures, various processes around generative design, which we used to develop many of the organisms, notions about AI and its relationship to nature, and just this experiential idea of conveying a future through media and technology. And really, again, sort of like connecting digital media to this idea of regeneration, this idea of thinking through a possible future through design. And hopefully it sort of like shows the power of design for imagining those kind of bold futures. So I think that's what I've got. And so I think we have some time for conversation, hopefully.
That was fantastic. Both presentations incredible. Didn't expect to hear so much of like narrative. Maybe I can prompt a little and ask like the role narrative plays in the speculative process, considering both of y'all are working pretty speculatively, and then I'll zip it. Yeah. Oh, Carlos, you're on mute.
Also, the role of narrative. Yeah, it's something that I've been exploring as well. And I think my approach to that has always been trying to establish a collaboration with technology, with AI models, and understanding that just like the sense of authorship starts to blur nowadays. So engaging with artificial intelligence as a co-pilot, as a co-author that is able to enhance whatever that you are able to imagine in terms of an architectural discourse or storytelling. So I think we are at a point in which it's just vital, like co-working with this technology.
Yeah, I mean, the narrative question is really interesting because as we've gotten more into sort of like exhibition or cultural work that tries to imagine a possible future or imagine, alternate futures, for instance, it becomes really important to kind of like convey tangibly what it would be like to live in that world. And so, narrative is an important part of that, but there's two other aspects which I think are critical. The first is what, sometimes game designers call internarrativity. So it's not only one narrative, but there's a series of different possible narratives that this world allows for, and then the connections between them become really, really critical. And so I think that's something that can be really powerful for design, is to say, okay, well, as you're moving through this exhibit, or as you're moving through this space or experience, there are many different ways that can happen, and they all reveal different aspects of what this future might feel like or be like. And then the other thing that I think is interesting from a narrative perspective is that I think you really have to contrast it with world building. I mean, narrative is something that unfolds in time, whereas world building is sort of like a snapshot of, it reveals a snapshot of things at a moment, and it's thinking very much about the kind of like artifacts and the kind of elements that you encounter that reveal specific rules within the world. And so they're obviously complementary. You have to have kind of like both the narrative and the world to do something that's sort of like rich. But I think it's sometimes useful to think through one or the other. The last thing I'd say about narrative is that one of the things that was really interesting, that was fun for us on the last project, is we started thinking about this AI that's kind of like monitoring the world, and how it would begin to realize that we had destroyed the world, and how it would begin to kind of like have this like emotional awakening almost about what had happened to the planet. And so we put together this kind of like book. There's this form of literature called epistolary novels, which are basically novels just written in letters. So you have a letter to the first person, and then they write a letter back, and so forth. It's a very, it's a form from like the 17th century, basically. But we wrote this kind of like epistolary novel, writing messages back and forth to this AI that's gradually becoming aware of the environmental catastrophe that it has to repair. And it was a really interesting way to think through the architecture, think through the experience from this point of view of the AI. So we can think about narrative from our perspective, but we can also think about it from the perspective of these post-human agents, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, another thing that I can, that I pick up from what you're saying is like the role of, I mean, I think it's also related to culture. Like AI becomes nowadays, it understands society and images and in a certain way that we can use to our advantage for either storytelling or curation. So I think it's important to engage with that capability that it has, that it can be unbiased. It can act as a foreign curator, and generate something different. So it's just it's an agent that is able to produce. I mean, it could be biased or unbiased sort of narratives. So I think the way in which culture is exposed or divulged nowadays is going to radically change through, I don't know, I don't know. I'm thinking about entertainment and how screenwriters are losing their jobs, and there's a strike in Hollywood because they might not be needed in the future. So I think just in terms of storytelling or generating a discourse, we have to find ways to engage with AI.
Can I jump in with another question? Unless y'all have questions for each other. I just get excited. I don't want to jump the gun, though.
No, go ahead, shoot.
Yeah, sure.
Or sorry, go ahead. Or Carlos, yeah.
Well, I was just like very interested in some of the things that you said about or the relationship between seeing and scanning, or let's say seeing digitally, and how you were using that. And basically what I understand that you're doing is like physical objects, trees or buildings are becoming nowadays some, like, in a sense, assets of this hybrid reality. So I mean, I don't know if what is your take on that? Because I am very interested in how architecture nowadays, or physical architecture, has become like a retronym. We didn't have that like 5 years ago, and now it has to exist with digital architecture. So yeah, and it all has to do. I mean, I think you're approaching it from scanning or from seeing digitally.
Yeah. So for a long time, I've been really interested in the ways that mathematized seeing or mathematical seeing changes the way architects can design. Of course, the other side of that is computational tools, which sort of like embody or encapsulate techniques of sort of like production. But the seeing process is also really critical. So, you know, I finished a book last year called Formulations, Architecture, Mathematics, Culture. And a big part of that book is actually thinking through ways in which technological seeing or mathematized seeing has mutated the ways that architects can imagine. And it's, again, I think it's just as important as the sort of like tools of making. And so one of the key mutations was this process of what's called triangulated surveying. So it was this process that originated in like the 1650s, basically, in part to measure the curvature of the Earth and the shape of the Earth. Nobody knew exactly what shape the Earth was, and so they would use this very precise kind of triangulation process to measure that. Well, that triangulation process is exactly the mesh process that we use today to represent any kind of geometric form, but especially sort of like scanned forms. And so there's this weird way in which that surveying was a way to format all of vision in triangles. And it didn't matter whether it was landscape or building or person or animal or tree or anything else. It became this kind of like common language of form. And that's something that's, obviously we're using it every day now, but really is the legacy of this sort of like 17th century process of surveying the planet. So I think there's a lot of other interesting mutations of vision. I mean, one of the things that we've been really interested in is neural classifiers, which are also a different way to think about vision, which is different than meshing, and there are many others. But I think each one of those opens up a new opportunity to think about problems in a different way. It's a way to think, it's like mutates heuristics beyond the sort of formal things that can be mutated through generative tools. You know what I mean? Because I feel like those things are very complementary.
Yeah, and
I think the way that you see and the way that you make.
Right, and I think I mean that's very pertinent. Like the way what you're saying about the way that you see and what it is that you see nowadays. Like, for example, I mean, I'm working a lot with nerves these days, and to me, it's very interesting because we've come to a point in which nerve is not really the type of geometry that we are used to, because it's not really geometry. It's just a visualization. Is this new medium, right? Is this new medium that we are learning how to engage? It's just like reference camera points arranged in a coherent way. So, and it's useful now because I think we are in this stage of hybridity right now, in which we're very into the metaverse, and I myself don't see a problem in which why I mean you cannot create a perfect mesh right now with Text-to-3D, and it's a problem. But to me, it's like, is it really a problem? I don't think it's a problem, or maybe it might not be, because you are still able to visualize it and experience it digitally and physically or hybridly. I don't know. So yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting nowadays.
Yeah, and like the NERF process, it's a surveying process, and it's a process that's very closely related to photogrammetry. It happens that it's a raster process, but it comes from that same sort of like DNA, and it's a different way of seeing, right? But that different way of seeing actually enables not only new ways of making, but new problems. I mean, making is a way to solve a problem, but seeing is the way to understand the problem. And I think those mutations of either one open new kind of design possibilities, but in very different ways.
Right. And then, I mean, what do you think about, I heard you speaking about ecology, and I saw that you were working a lot with AR, and again, like doing these experiments with, like scanning physically or scanning digitally and producing physically. That's very interesting. So is that something that you also think about currently, like this hybrid ecology and how it how these assets relate to each other across the realms.
Yeah.
And then what I always get is that people speak about the uncanny valley reaction that you get of the digital, but nowadays that we are actually serving in the digital, I think sometimes you get that reverse effect, right? It's like you get like a reverse uncanny valley, because nowadays we're very used to seeing things digitally, not physically, or like when you meet a Zoom friend or someone that you haven't seen. So again, I think that's something to engage with right now, something to address, ecology or hybrid ecology.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things like for the Google tree, one of the things that we found kind of funny was that everybody's trying to make the digital world more real, but we're just making the real world more digital. It was like we kind of see it's like we're allowing that stuff to like leak into our reality, and I think that's, I don't know. I mean, I think it's an intriguing inversion of the way that people can often approach these kind of dualities. But those things are becoming more and more sort of things which exist side by side, and I think, yeah, from a representational point of view, it becomes this really interesting kind of thing, and this question of kind of like where representations of reality end and where other kinds of representations begin. It's a fun game to play. In terms of design, I think it's like there's no limit to the visual invention that can come from that game.
Mm-hmm.
Kako, you had another question, or?
Yeah, I did, but I'm just sitting back enjoying y'all just ping pong off each other.
Oh,
but I
go
guess
ahead.
Like hearing both of y'all leverage different models and AI, like I'm imagining some future where like a design AI is creating some Gesamtkunstwerk that's like very tailored for a specific objective that the model is like defined for. Like, how do you continue to make space for the variety of people and humans engaging with these forms that are being made and the models that are being created? Because there is some translation from like the physical to virtual and then virtual to physical, but still like virtually, like a person is still engaging with this in a way, whether they're on their computer, like VR on their phones, and then physically, like digital to physical, like how are people or like the variety of people accounted for, or maybe that doesn't matter and it's like, here's the Gesamtkunstwerk, enjoy it, this is my art.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways you can think about it. First of all, is kind of like what happens to the designer, and my perspective is that the designer is sort of the role that they've always had, which is they're there to kind of break things, or at least like the critical designer, they're there to like screw things up and like smash everything and like take all the pieces and make something new. I mean, that's there's a kind of like philosophy about that kind of destructive, reconstructive impulse that at least it's like a really important part of what we do. I mean, what we like to do is just kind of like take things to the limit, see where they fail, or put something in conversation with this new thing, which creates like ambiguities or sort of like that frustrates it in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like AI in itself, or sort of like ML in itself, is an interesting process, but I feel like you don't really sort of or the way to expand or the way to create something from it is not necessarily to create something from AI itself, but instead to put something totally different in conversation with them and say, how do we put these two things that should be impossible to put together in the same room to create something? Do you know?
You don't
what
want to
like,
use what it gives you. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to use what it gives you. I mean, that's part of the reason why we're really interested in this interaction between like very foreign objects, garbage, for example, and these sort of more pristine processes, because then you can have something that's a negotiation. It's sort of like you can see it struggle to become something, and that's when you've got something interesting, is when there is this struggle. There's like this fight. I mean, if it's too smooth, or if it's like, if it's too easy, that's no fun.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Again, in most of my works, I always try to. I think I try to engage with AI in the same manner. Is like I try to fight a lot the automaticity that it has and the immediateness that you get from it. And what I understand is that is yeah, I think it's kind of like a partner or a tool or something similar, in which you just have to use it and just keep thinking of how to use it. I guess related to the way in which creative processes have always worked. You know, there's I don't know, like contrast or juxtapositions, things like that. Not use just the raw outputs, or just try to use them creatively. Um, yeah, I think it's things about that. Yeah.
Yeah, there was this one of the one of the projects that I didn't show was this project that we did for this show at Cooper Union last year called Model Behavior. And the project that we did was a project called Twilight Crystalline Models Hunt Wistfully. And so it was a project actually about generative AI. But the idea was, for prompts, we would create these nonsense sentences that were deliberately contradictory. So there's like this very long history in linguistics of what are called like either nonsense sentences or impossible objects. And these are things where if you were to write them out, they would be almost like self-contradictory. And so we compiled a bunch of these kinds of self-contradictory statements and then fed them into some of these models, and at the same time visualized what was happening with the neural nets underneath. So you would see the images, but you would also see how the network was sort of like processing it and sort of like struggling with it. And that was actually kind of interesting because there's this way in which you're like throwing down a challenge for the AI. Like Noam Chomsky, who's this very famous like linguist, he would develop these kind of sentences. Like there was this one that he had called, it was like, or phrases, it was like, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. I just love that. There's something like very poetic about it. And that's what we're trying to do, is like bring the poetry by bringing something that somehow surpasses logic and put it in dialogue with this thing that is nothing but logic. And then what happens from that?
That's fantastic. So as always, these conversations are like fantastic, but have to end. Before we do so, I wanted to open it up to the audience and then ask some of their questions too. So Lydia asks, both of you mentioned a form of digital recycling and using AI to generate new materials and designs and structures. What do you think could be some limitations to this advanced new technology?
Well,
go ahead, Carlos.
Well, I mean, I guess I would speak from my experience. Yes, I was trying to engage with materiality and how to use AI for that, and I think it worked in the sense that I was able to generate just unexpected qualities of images that really looked like this. I don't know, like hybrid materials or like stages of decomposition or reuse. My limitation in that sense was, or my challenge at that moment was, try to materialize it, to make it 3D. And I found interesting ways to achieve it. And I think because it was not a pristine result, I thought that is one of the reasons why it was interesting. It was a bit of a uncertainty in the result, a bit of gambling, but you could recognize the idea of my approach, at least. It's like, yes, I was trying to replicate some sorting process, and how to eventually generate a new use for a data set, and how that could actually eventually have potential for implementation in manufacturing, which I thought it had. I thought it had in the sense of reusable plastics or certain types of materials. So I think I don't know about the limitations, but I think it's more about the opportunities that we have right now, at least of translating images, which are like a very high level of development right now, like just like text to image or image to image, into manufacturing process.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big limitations on that, on the idea of sort of like ML enabled recycling, is the fact that grading materials for reuse is actually kind of a hard problem. So, you know, if you're taking timber and you want to reuse that timber in another structural context, actually determining whether it's viable for that is sometimes not so easy. And there are a lot of other examples of that kind of issue. So, you know, I think the limitation is not so much an ML limitation, but it's like this really kind of like hard material limitation of like, if you have this, how do you know that it's at the quality that you need? I mean, our whole building industry is geared towards making materials as uniform and predictable as possible. And when you take, you know, used materials, that level of kind of like determinism or reliability it's just not there. And so finding ways to actually grade those materials, I think it's a super open question. And I think it's, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily related to AI. It's just related to kind of like, how can we scientifically evaluate that stuff so that it can be used reliably? It's a big problem.
Yeah, that does make sense. Like, do the materials then end up becoming appliques on top of like existing structures?
Yeah, so it just depends. I mean, it is possible to grade some structural materials, but you have to go through very particular kind of processes, and sometimes they can be destructive or invasive or those kinds of things. They can actually like frustrate your ability to reuse it. But you know, other times, you know, this is part of the reason why a lot of reused materials are actually just like shredded and used as like feedstock for other stuff, because it's just hard to predict what they would do. Like for example, if you have water infiltration on plaster or something like that, you know, there could be mold, and you'd have to sort of like tear it apart to see if there's any of those issues. So anyway, it's an ongoing issue to address before we can really get this sort of fully circular process in the building industry.
The next question is coming from Kevin. As someone who's majoring in architecture with an emphasis in computation, I believe that architecture can and should have a symbiotic relationship with AI. How can I keep up with your work?
With our work?
Social handles, I guess.
Instagram, Twitter.
Well, yeah, I mean,
websites.
Information is so, you know, spread nowadays. It's very easy, and I think it's actually like an oversaturation of information related to these topics and yeah, it's hard to keep track. That's true, and I think it's hard to like discern what to engage with. You know, there are new models coming out every day, and yeah, you really have to put or like be conscious of what you put your time into, right? What do you think is valuable to explore? And yeah, it just relates to the outcomes that you are interested in producing, right? Like I don't know if it's visualization or you're interested in materials or algorithms. But the information is, I would say, is very democratic right now. It's like it's really out there.
Yeah, and I think it's useful to say, you know, I talked about combining AI with something else or colliding it with something else. I think it's really useful to say, okay, well, AI as a sort of like process. If I were to think about one other thing in architecture or design that is also really important to me, which has nothing to do with AI, how do I put those two together? Because that allows you to create something that's differentiated and something that's sort of a little bit, you know, that's kind of your own. And I think that's a valuable thing these days.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask a question, maybe that some people are thinking, but might be too scared to ask. Is y'all's level of technical acumen is pretty dang high. If I were a novice, where do I start? How could I start engaging with these tools, these techniques, these ways of thinking, this practice? Like, what would be a good entry point?
Yeah, I mean, what I can say from my experience is that I think my interest or my my use of the current AI technologies was actually, for me, it was like very seamless because I was always interested in just computational design in general. That is something that I learned first, and I mean, it was based on coding with learning how to code like from many years ago, and then just always working in the 3D realm for expressing architectural ideas. So I would say that yeah, I think there is an important base that is necessary in terms of learning how to use technology, how to use coding or architectural representational tools. That is necessary, and it's gonna make things easier for your creative process and how to use the new AI tools that are coming out, like, constantly.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's good to sort of like start modestly and learn sort of like some basic language, or begin to learn sort of like one or two simple AI tools, and then at the same time, I think what was also always really useful for me was to set myself a challenge and to say, it could be one of two kinds of challenges. It could be a kind of project that I really want to make, or it can be someone who's doing something that I think is amazing and I want to figure out how it works. And I think if you set yourself those kinds of challenges, those are really amazing ways to sort of like bring yourself to the next level, and at the same time create something that's kind of compelling. And so I think just if you always kind of like incrementally set yourself those kinds of challenges, then over time you can really sort of take next steps and do some really interesting things. So I think it's important just try and like set yourself those sort of like small challenges that also produce creative results. Yeah, I mean, sky's the limit.
Right.
Well, thank you both. Sorry, Carlos, you were going to say one more thing?
No. No, thank you. Thank you for this space.
Yeah, this
wasn't
is
gonna say
fun.
anything.
Thanks so much.
I like these chats. I thank you both. I feel like I keep learning so much from hearing all these presentations. Now I have a list of things that I have to look up after this call and like start jumping into. So a round of applause for our speakers, Carlos and Andrew. Really appreciate you all taking the time today and let us into your world a bit. All right, thank you.
Yeah, it's been great to finally meet you, Andrew. I know your work, I mean, from a while ago, and also because of George. So yeah, it's nice meeting you.
Yeah, and Carlos, it was great. It was great stuff. This was a lot of fun. So I'm sure our paths will cross again.
Of course, anytime.
Bye.
All right. Thank you, guys. Bye.